They told me the Lunar Prince never looked at anyone directly. Keep your breathing shallow, the older servants warned. Let your footsteps whisper. Let your presence fade like morning mist, and his attention will pass over you. I believed them until the night I was assigned to his wing. Kai sits in his study surrounded by maps he cannot read, ink-black hair falling loose around sharp features. Advisors gesture wildly around him, fingers jabbing at documents, mouths forming words with exaggerated precision. But he only watches their hands, tracks their movements with eyes the color of winter frost. No reaction when a fist slams the table. No turn of his head when someone storms from the room. It is not the stillness of restraint. It is the emptiness of a man who has never seen written words take shape. I have cleaned sick rooms where fever spoke louder than voices. I have scrubbed floors where old blood whispered stories the living tried to forget. This feels the same, wrong in a way that pulls at something deep in my chest. My gaze catches on his eyes, on the way they move too slowly across parchment, the unnatural hesitation there. Something in me recognizes it like a wolf recognizing a limp in prey. I am only a maid, an omega who learned to survive by making herself forgettable as dust. Yet when circumstance places me close enough to smell cedar and cold rain on his skin, close enough to see his fingers trace letters he cannot comprehend, my hand moves. One forbidden touch, one reckless reach toward the pages before him, and the blindness caging our prince begins to shatter. Ink remembers everything. That is what my mother told me before the consumption took her. She worked as a scribe in a merchant house, her fingers perpetually stained, her eyes weakening year by year until she could no longer see the words she copied. The letters hold memory, she would say, hands trembling over parchment. Even when eyes fail, the shapes remain. Omegas like me were the forgotten ink in those memories, useful for a season, then washed away. My mother gave me to a scholar's household when I was 12, trading my labor for a promise I would learn to read. I lasted 4 years in that cold stone house, moving from library to kitchen to sick room, until one careless observation changed everything. The scholar's daughter was studying ancient texts, her brow furrowed in concentration. I was meant to be emptying chamber pots, invisible. But when I passed behind her, I saw the page upside down and backward through the thin fabric she'd laid over it for tracing. You have it reversed, I said before thought could stop tongue. The character for Moon faces the other direction. She turned, eyes wide with shock. A maid correcting her. The scholar was summoned. He examined the page, then examined me with eyes that held no warmth. You can read? He asked, voice sharp with suspicion. Some, I whispered. My mother taught me before. An omega who reads is an omega with ideas above her station, he cut in. Ideas that lead to problems. They tested me, made me read passages I had no business knowing. When I could, when the letters spoke to me as clearly as voices, fear replaced surprise in their faces. The scholar's wife called me unnatural. The daughter called me a thief, stealing knowledge that did not belong to me. I learned then what happens to omegas who see too much. Within a week, I was sold to a merchant who needed bodies for his caravans. Then a tavern keeper who needed hands to scrub floors. Then a farmer whose wife had died, leaving children in chaos. Each place taught me a new way to hide what I could do. Eyes down, questions unasked, the knowing that lived in me buried deep. But I still saw the patterns. The ledger books the merchant's son was embezzling from, numbers not quite adding up. The love letters the tavern keeper's daughter received, penned in 2 different hands claiming to be the same man. The boundary marker the neighboring farmer had moved 3 feet onto our land, hoping no one could read the survey maps. I said nothing. I learned to ignore the itch in my fingers when I saw text miscopied, contracts signed without reading, lies written in elegant script. By the time I reached the lunar court, my life had been reduced to a series of masters who never knew what I carried behind my downcast eyes. The palace rose from the mountain like a crown of white stone, each tower reaching toward a sky that seemed closer here than anywhere else. Inside, I became one more gray shadow in servant's cloth. We lived in the lower levels where sunlight came filtered through high windows, turning everything the color of old pearl. Dawn meant carrying water before the nobles woke. Scrubbing floors until knees ached and hands cracked. Polishing silver that would be tarnished again by evening. Hauling linens up narrow stairs until breath came short. It was easy to disappear in such a place. That had always suited me. But disappearing did not stop me from noticing. The first time I saw Kai, I was delivering clean bedding to the royal wing. The doors to his study stood open, and I glimpsed him through the gap. I did not need to be told who he was. Everyone knew the Lunar Prince, the one who would rule when his father passed, the one cursed by the moon goddess herself. He sat at a massive desk covered in documents, shoulders rigid beneath a dak coat, hair tied back with a silver cord. Advisors surrounded him like wolves circling uncertain prey, pointing at pages, their frustration visible even from the corridor. Kai's eyes moved over the words before him with a slowness that spoke of effort, not comprehension. His jaw tightened with each passing moment. He did not look up when someone cleared their throat impatiently, did not respond when a hand tapped the document he was supposedly reading. His gaze stayed fixed on letters that might as well have been scattered stones for all the sense they made to him. The others called him many things. Moon-touched, ink-blind, the reading-cursed prince. In the servants' quarters, they whispered that the goddess had taken his ability to read as punishment for his father's sins, that what divine powers steal cannot be returned by mortal means. Some said it made him more fearsome, a prince who ruled by instinct and memory alone. Some said it made him pitiable. I watched him and saw neither divine curse nor tragedy. I saw a man who had learned to navigate a world of written law and contracts and treaties without being able to read a single word. The way he watched lips when people summarized documents. The way his fingers traced pages as if feeling for meaning. The way his expression hardened just before someone grew impatient with his slowness, as though he could sense disappointment gathering in the air. Isolation wrapped around him like a second skin. In the days that followed, I glimpsed him often. In the council chamber where advisors read proclamations aloud while he listened with absolute focus. In the library where he sat surrounded by books he could not open. In the garden at dawn, running his fingers over carved stone markers, lips moving silently as if trying to remember what each symbol meant. Each time, that old unwelcome awareness stirred in me, the one that had cost me safety before. When a kitchen girl burned herself on a stove, I knew exactly which salve to apply before the cook even reached for supplies. When the head housekeeper's hip began to bother her, I could have told her it would worsen before the first snow. I said nothing, but every time I saw Kai's eyes move across a page with that careful, hopeless focus, instinct needled at my ribs. Something is wrong, it insisted. Not with his mind, not with his will, but with the way he sees. His blindness was not smooth or natural. It was constructed, deliberate, like a wall built brick by brick. The healers called it curse. The servants called it fate. The advisors called it inconvenience. But the longer I watched him, the more certain I became. Whatever bound his eyes to meaningless shapes was not born of the goddess. It was placed there, the way a lock is fitted to a door. I lay awake at night in my narrow cot, listening to the breathing of other maids, trying to push the certainty away. I reminded myself of the scholar's house, of the fear in their eyes when they realized what I could do. I repeated the promise I had made the day they cast me out. Never interfere again. Ink remembers everything. So do scars. But as the moon waxed and waned, another truth grew harder to ignore. If I could see what others refused to acknowledge, if my knowing was the only tool I possessed in this life, then perhaps some bindings were not meant to be left intact, especially when they held a prince who had never been allowed to read his own kingdom's laws. The study emptied in stages. First the senior advisors, leaving with tight expressions and carefully neutral bows. Then the scribes, clutching their precious documents. Even the guards withdrew to the corridor, as if afraid to witness what came next. Only I remained near the doorway, fingers gripping a stack of fresh parchment I'd been sent to deliver, pulse hammering against my throat. Kai sat frozen at his desk, one hand pressed flat against the page before him as if he could force meaning through his palm. The other hand trembled slightly at his side, a crack in the composed mask he wore for the cot. I should have left. Should have set down the parchment and fled before my presence was noted. Instead, I watched his fingers curl against the document, watched frustration carve lines deeper around his mouth, and felt that dangerous pull in my chest grow stronger. "Bring her forward," he said, voice rough with barely contained emotion. My stomach dropped. The guards appeared in the doorway, hands closing around my arms before I could step back. They dragged me into the study, my feet stumbling over thick carpets, and deposited me directly before his desk. I had never been this close to him. The scent of cedar and winter rain was stronger here, mixed with ink and the faint metallic edge of stress. Up close, I could see the exhaustion carved into his features, sleepless nights written in the shadows beneath his eyes. "You touched my work," he said quietly. "Not an accusation. A statement." "Forgive me, Your Highness," I whispered. "I only meant the character for Moon." His frost-pale eyes fixed on me with an intensity that stole breath. "You said it was reversed. How did you know?" Panic clawed up my throat. Admitting I could read would mark me as unnatural, presumptuous, dangerous. Denying it would be a lie he would see through instantly. I had spent years making myself invisible, and now I stood exposed in the worst possible way. My mother taught me, I managed. Before she died. I can read some. Some. The word held disbelief and something else, something raw I could not name. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against stone. The advisors who just left have been teaching me since I was a child. Healers, scholars, specialists brought from across the realm, all of them claiming they could help me see the words. He moved around the desk with the controlled grace of a predator, each step measured. I forced myself to stand still though every instinct screamed to retreat. They poke at my eyes with their salves and their theories, he continued, voice low and sharp. They blame the goddess, my bloodline, divine punishment. And you, he stopped an arm's length away. An Omega maid glances at a page and sees what I cannot. Your Highness, I never meant. Do you think I have not tried? The words cracked like breaking ice. Do you think I have not sat in this room until dawn, tracing letters with my fingers, listening to tutors sound out words I will never see? Do you think I have not begged the moon herself to lift whatever curse binds me? The anguish beneath his anger hit me like a physical blow. This was not a prince angry at being corrected. This was a man confronting the reality that his blindness might not be inevitable. I do not know what they told you, Your Highness, I said carefully. I only know what I can see. His eyes narrowed. See? Yes. I gathered what little courage remained. When you look at text, your eyes move but they do not follow the shapes the way they should. It is as if, I hesitated, searching for words, as if there is something between you and the meaning, like looking through frosted glass. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned sharply back to his desk. Show me. What? If you can see this wrongness, prove it. He gestured at the scattered documents. Read for me. My hands shook as I approached the desk. The nearest page was a trade agreement, dense with legal terminology. I picked it up, acutely aware of his gaze burning into the side of my face. It details tariffs on imported silver. I began, voice unsteady. Clause 7 specifies that merchants from the Northern Territories must. Enough. His hand shot out, snatching the document from my fingers. He held it close to his face, eyes tracking across the lines with desperate focus. I see shapes, curves and lines. Nothing more. The defeat in his voice made my chest ache. Before I could think better of it, I stepped closer. May I try something? He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. An Omega presuming to help a prince. It should have been laughable. Instead, his expression shifted to something cautious, almost hopeful. What do you need? He asked quietly. Your hand. I held out my own, palm up, fighting the tremor running through my fingers. And your trust, just for a moment. For a heartbeat, he did not move. Then slowly, carefully, he placed his hand in mine. His palm was warm, calloused from sword work, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through me. I pushed it aside and guided his hand to the page, pressing his index finger against the first letter. This is the character portrayed, I said softly, tracing the shape with his finger beneath mine. Do you feel the curve here? The way it hooks at the bottom? I feel parchment, he murmured. But he did not pull away. Look at my finger, not the letter itself. I moved our joined hands to the next character. Watch the movement. The pattern. His breathing changed, became more focused. Our hands moved together across the page, my voice describing each shape while his eyes tracked our motion instead of the words themselves. Wait. He stilled. Again. The last one. I repeated the movement, our fingers tracing the character for silver. His eyes followed, not the letter, but the path our hands made through the air just above it. I can see that, he breathed. The movement. The shape you are drawing. Hope flared bright and dangerous in my chest. Then you are not blind to meaning, Your Highness. You are blind to stillness. Your eyes need motion to understand form. He pulled back suddenly, staring at his own hand as if it had betrayed him. That makes no sense. Words do not move. No, I agreed. But they can be traced. Followed. Given movement by someone who sees them. The implications hung between us like smoke. If he needed motion to read, he needed a guide. Someone to show him the shapes, to trace the patterns until his mind learned to bridge the gap between movement and meaning. Someone like me. You will not speak of this, he said abruptly, authority sliding back into his voice like armor. To anyone. Of course not, Your Highness. His jaw worked, emotions warring across his features. Then, you will return tomorrow. Same time. Tell the guards I have requested your services as a copyist. My pulse jumped. Your Highness, I am only. I know what you are. His eyes met mine, and I saw the edge of desperation there. You are the first person who has ever shown me a path forward. Until I understand what has been done to me and whether it can be undone, you will remain close. The weight of that settled over me like a mantle. Not quite protection. Not quite a threat. As you command, I whispered. He exhaled slowly, the sound carrying years of frustration. Go, before someone questions why a maid has been alone with me for so long. I backed toward the door, legs unsteady. As I slipped into the corridor, one thought beat louder than my racing heart. I had walked into the prince's study expecting to deliver parchment and leave unseen. Instead, I had been claimed, not as prey, not yet as anything so gentle as beloved, but as something far more dangerous. I had become necessary. The palace did not grow quieter once Kai began to understand his blindness was not divine curse but something stranger. It only grew more watchful. On the first morning after the study incident, I was summoned not to his public chambers but to a small tower room I had never entered before. High windows let in cold northern light. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books he had probably never opened. A fire burned low, gnawing at birch logs that filled the air with a sweet, clean scent. He stood by the window when I entered, back rigid, hands clasped behind him. No crown today, no formal robes, just dark leather and wool that made him look younger, less untouchable. Close the door, he said without turning. The latch clicked louder than expected in the quiet room. I stayed near it, uncertain how close I was permitted to stand when we were alone. Everything is clearer, he said. Since you showed me, I can see shapes now where before there was only chaos. But I still cannot make them hold still long enough to mean anything. I took a careful step forward. It may be that stillness is your difficulty, Your Highness. Some minds do not work the way we expect them to. He turned then, studying me with that new intensity. You said I was not blind to meaning. Prove it. Teach me. Teaching a prince felt like trying to hold fire. Dangerous, likely to burn, impossible to put down once started. But I stepped away from the door anyway. If the moon had placed me in this strange position, I would not dishonor her by retreating. Start with something simple, I said. Not a full document. Just one word. I moved to the nearest shelf and selected a slim volume, opening it to a random page. He came to stand beside me, closer than was strictly proper. His arm brushed mine, sending warmth through fabric. This word, I pointed. Watch my finger, not the letters themselves. I traced the character slowly, letting my finger dance above the ink. His eyes followed the movement, pupils tracking the pattern. Moon, he murmured. Yes. I could not help the smile that tugged at my lips. Good. Now this one. We worked like that for an hour, then two. Me tracing, him following, gradually building a vocabulary of motion shapes his mind could grasp. When he successfully recognized wolf without my help, something eased in his shoulders. It feels like remembering, he said softly. Not learning. As if this knowledge was always there, just locked away. Perhaps it was, I said. Perhaps whatever prevents you from seeing still letters did not remove your ability to understand. Only your access to it. His gaze sharpened. You speak as if you believe this was done deliberately. I hesitated, towing dangerous ground. I believe the mind is not usually this specific in what it withholds, Your Highness. Curses from the goddess tend to be broader, more absolute. So you think someone did this to me? Not a question. I think, I said carefully, that it would benefit certain people if you could not read the laws you are meant to enforce. If you had to rely entirely on advisors to tell you what contracts say. Silence fell, heavy and considering. Then he turned away, pacing to the window. If that were true, if someone had bound my sight deliberately, they would have done it when I was young. Too young to remember. Yes, I agreed quietly. His hands curled into fists on the windowsill. I have spent 26 years believing the goddess herself found me unworthy. That my inability to read was divine judgment for sins I could not name. The pain in his voice made my chest tighten. Your Highness. Kai. He looked back at me, jaw set. When we are alone like this, call me Kai. I am tired of titles and distance. The request felt like standing at a cliff's edge. That would not be appropriate. Neither is what we are doing. A bitter smile touched his lips. Teaching a prince to read like a child. Questioning whether his entire life has been a lie. Appropriate left this room the moment you showed me I was not cursed by the divine, only by men. He was right, though the truth of it frightened me. Still, I nodded. Kai, then. Something shifted in his expression when I said his name. A softening, brief but unmistakable. That became our pattern in the days that followed. Each morning, he would summon me to the tower room. We would work through texts together, me tracing, him learning to follow movement instead of fighting for stillness. Simple words at first, then phrases, then full sentences that made his eyes light with understanding. This says the Northern Border Treaty allows for seasonal grazing, he said one morning, voice filled with wonder. His finger hovered above the page, following the path I had shown him. They told me it prohibited all crossing. They lied, I said simply. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Only memorized the truth written in ink he could finally, haltingly, begin to see. Sometimes the lessons were frustrating. He would lose the thread of a word halfway through, his eyes unable to hold the motion pattern long enough. Or he would confuse similar characters, mixing up lore and land, until he slammed his palm on the table in disgust. I am a prince who cannot even read children's primers, he growled during one such moment. You are a prince who was deliberately prevented from learning, I corrected. That is not the same as incapability. He looked at me then, frustration giving way to something more vulnerable. You defend me readily for someone who barely knows me. I know enough, I said. The words came easier now, after days of working side by side. I know you fight harder than anyone I have ever met to overcome what was stolen from you. That is worth defending. His breath caught. We were standing close again. We always ended up close during lessons, huddled over pages, our hands moving in tandem. From this angle, I could see the exact shade of his eyes, pale gray rimmed in silver, like frost on glass. Mara, he said quietly. My name, which I had told him during our second lesson when maid, began to feel too impersonal. Yes. What do you see when you look at me? The question caught me off guard. Your Highness, Kai, I do not understand. Everyone sees the curse when they look at me, he said. The prince who cannot read, who must have every document summarized, who signs treaties without knowing their full contents. What do you see? I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my throat. The truth would be dangerous. But he had asked, and lying felt impossible. I see someone brilliant, I whispered. Someone who memorizes entire conversations to compensate for not reading notes. Who rules fairly despite advisors who could easily deceive him. Who keeps fighting even when everything suggests he should surrender. I paused, then added even more quietly. I see someone worthy of truth, not platitudes. His hand lifted slowly, stopping just short of my face. May I? I nodded, not trusting my voice. His fingers brushed my jaw, achingly gentle, as if I might shatter under too firm a touch. The contact sent heat spiraling through me. Your heart is racing, he murmured. You can hear it. My voice came out breathless. A faint smile touched his lips. I can feel it. The pulse in your throat. You are either terrified or... He trailed off, but his thumb moved, stroking along my jawline in a way that made my answer obvious. Both, I admitted. Both, he repeated, and something in his expression softened further. Mara, if I asked you to stay close to me, not as a teacher, not as a servant, but as, he struggled for words, as someone whose presence I have come to need, would fear or something else win? My mouth went dry. This was the precipice I had sensed approaching since that first day. The moment where careful distance collapsed into something more dangerous and infinitely more real. Before I could answer, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. We sprang apart as the door opened, a guard's face appearing in the gap. Your Highness, the council requests your presence. Urgent matter regarding the border. Kai's expression shuttered, the prince sliding back into place. I will be there shortly. The guard withdrew. In the aftermath, tension hummed between us like a plucked string. We will continue this later, Kai said, but his eyes promised it was not a dismissal, only a delay. I curtsied, legs unsteady, and fled before I could do something irreversible. Like tell him the conspiracy I had begun to suspect ran deeper than either of us knew. Like confess that his need for my presence was becoming matched by my own dangerous, growing attachment to him. Like admit that somewhere in the tower room, between traced letters and shared frustrations, I had started to fall for a prince I had no right to want. Doors in the palace were thicker than they appeared, but stone carried sound in unexpected ways. I learned this 3 nights after Kai almost asked me to stay, carrying wine to an antechamber adjacent to the council room. The corridor was nearly deserted, torches burning low in their sconces. I knew better than to linger near that door. It was where powerful men discussed matters maids were not meant to hear. But the steward had sent me with a tray for the guards, and the guards had stepped away, and I made the mistake of existing within earshot when voices rose on the other side of the oak. "We cannot pretend this changes nothing." Lord Varen's voice, sharp as a blade drawn across stone. "A blind prince is manageable. One learning to read is a threat to everything we have built." A deeper voice, Lord Theron, if I matched the oily smoothness correctly, answered. "Your concern is noted. But the change is barely begun. He traces like a child. It will be years before he can truly read independently, if ever." The tray trembled in my hands. I pressed my back against cold stone, shadow swallowing me. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I had survived too many households by learning to listen, by recognizing when whispered arguments meant it was time to pack and disappear. "If he begins to read the contracts we have had him sign blindly," Varen hissed, "these walls will not protect us. He will start asking different questions. Questions about why the border agreements favor our holdings. Why the trade routes benefit our families. Why?" "He is still the same man," Theron interrupted. "Trained to trust advisors, to rely on summaries. With careful handling." "You mean with you controlling what he learns while that Omega maid has her hands on him?" Varen spat the word Omega, with such venom I flinched. Do not think I have not noticed his sudden fascination with a servant who should have remained invisible. Heat flooded my cheeks, shame and fear tangling. I should have walked away. My feet refused. "He relies on her for now," Theron said smoothly. "A drowning man clings to the first hand that reaches for him. That does not mean he cannot be guided back to dependence once his novelty with letters fades." "Your metaphors grow more insulting by the day," Varen muttered. "We invested considerable resources to ensure his blindness remained absolute. Years of bribes to healers, years of careful manipulation." The tray slipped a fraction in my grip. One cup clinked against another, a soft betraying ring. Silence fell on the other side of the door. Not empty silence, but the taut kind that comes before violence. "Did you hear that?" someone muttered. My heart leaped into my throat. I hurried down the corridor as quietly as shaking hands allowed, turning the corner just as the door creaked open. I pressed myself into a servant's alcove, breath sawing in my lungs, listening to footsteps enter the hall, pause, retreat. Bribes. They had bribed healers to keep him blind. Not the goddess. Not fate. Coin and conspiracy and cruel convenience. By the time I reached the servants' quarters, the tray rattled so violently a cook snatched it from me with a glare. I mumbled apology, barely hearing her scold. The roar in my ears was my own pulse. In my narrow bed that night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kai's face in the tower room as he struggled to make letters hold meaning. The way his jaw clenched when words slipped away from him. The way his expression cleared when I showed him the path through motion, anchoring him. He trusts advisors, Theron had said. True enough. But Kai had started to trust my guidance too. If healers had been paid to maintain his blindness, then every examination he had endured as a child, every compassionate shake of the head, every "there is nothing to be done," had been a lie purchased with gold. His world had been narrowed deliberately. His isolation was not accident but architecture. My stomach churned. I thought of the scholar who had cast me out for daring to question his authority, how easily the household had believed him over a frightened Omega. If these men discovered I had overheard their conspiracy, what would they call me? Spy. Manipulator. An Omega using unnatural abilities to twist the prince's mind. The worst part was that some of it, from the outside, might look true. I was spending hours alone with Kai now, teaching him to read, guiding his hands over parchment. My scent would cling to his clothes. My voice would echo in his thoughts long after I left. If someone wanted a story to turn him against me, they already had all the pieces. I turned onto my side, staring at moonlight on the ceiling. "Leave," a cold, practical voice whispered. "Take what little coin you have. Find a caravan heading east. Vanish into a village where princes are distant rumors and wolves run on 4 legs, not 2. Another voice, quieter but stubborn, answered, "And what then? What of the man who had placed his hand in yours like a drowning swimmer reaching for shore? What of the prince whose first real understanding of written words had happened in front of you, not his advisors or healers, because he could not bear for them to see him struggle. What of his rare smile when he finally read a full sentence on his own? He is still the same man, I whispered to the darkness. Except he was not. Not entirely. The old Kai had ruled in ignorance, wrapped in others' interpretations. This one was learning to see truth written in ink, discovering what had been hidden from him. Letters had stripped some of his armor, not the leather kind, but the kind built from necessity and enforced dependence. I had seen that unarmored man. I had watched his face transform when he read Moon for the first time, tracing the character with wonder entirely at odds with his fearsome reputation. I had seen frustration spark in his eyes when an advisor tried to summarize a document he was learning to read himself, insisting he wanted to see the actual words. Most dangerous of all, I had seen the way his expression softened when I entered the tower room, as if some part of him had learned my footsteps and decided they were worth anticipating. The thought of leaving him to men who had paid for his blindness made my chest ache worse than any fear. Yet fear was real. If they had spent years maintaining his inability to read, what would they do to protect that investment? A maid could vanish in a palace like this. One day scrubbing floors, the next found at the base of a tower with a broken neck. Omegas were always slipping, always losing their footing, always meeting tragic ends that no one questioned too closely. I pressed my palm over my racing heart, remembering the warmth of his hand against my jaw. "Teach me," he had said. "Show me the truth they have kept from me." If I ran now, I would be abandoning that trust and handing his newly opening eyes back to the very people who had tried to keep them shut. The moon sees cowards as clearly as she sees conspirators. My mother used to say that, ink-stained fingers tracing my hair. "I am tired of being afraid," I whispered to the empty room. The darkness offered no answer, but the words settled in me like a stone finding its place in a wall. Leaving would be safer. Staying might kill me. But safety had never given anyone back their sight. In the morning, when the summons came, a page breathless at the servant's entrance, stammering that His Highness requires your presence immediately, I wiped my hands, smoothed my apron, and went. Each step up the tower stairs felt like walking a knife's edge between stone and secrets. As I climbed, I heard the palace differently. The careful hush when I passed certain doors. The too loud laughter of men near the council chamber. The brittle edge of fear in servants' voices when they spoke the prince's name. Behind it all lay another sound, faint but steady, like a drum beating beneath earth. Kai's presence, not his heartbeat. I was not yet close enough for that, but the certainty that somewhere above me he was learning to see, to question, to understand the lies written into every contract he had ever signed blind. At the tower door, I paused for a single breath. "Run," the old fear whispered one last time. I knocked instead. Names carry weight when you finally learn to read them yourself. Kai told me this the first time he traced his own title in ink without my guidance. We were in the tower room, afternoon light slanting through high windows, casting our shadows long across the floor. "Before," he said, fingers still resting on the parchment where his name was written, "titles were sounds people made at me, shapes their mouths formed. I knew I was called Prince, but I had never seen the word, never understood how it looked." He lifted his hand, staring at his palm as if it had betrayed some secret. "Now I can trace it, follow the curves, and it feels heavier, more real." I stood on the other side of the table, holding a new text we had been working through, a property deed he was learning to decipher. "Does that trouble you?" "Yes." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Because if my own name was kept from me in written form, what else have I never truly seen? What laws bear my signature without my comprehension? What promises have I made blindly?" The anguish beneath the questions made me want to reach for him, to offer comfort the way I would during difficult lessons. But something in his posture warned me this was a different kind of pain, one that needed space to breathe. "You can learn them now," I said quietly. "Every law, every treaty, every contract. It will take time, but time I have already lost." His jaw clenched. 26 years of ruling in darkness while others interpreted reality for me. How many decisions did I make based on lies? How many people suffered because I could not read the truth? "You made the best decisions you could with the information given to you," I said. "That is not the same as failure." He huffed a bitter laugh. "You are generous with absolution for someone who barely knows me. I know you spend hours each day learning to read when you could simply continue as you were," I countered. "I know you practice tracing letters until your fingers cramp because you refuse to remain ignorant. I know." I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I know you are perhaps the most determined person I have ever met. That counts for something. His expression shifted, anger giving way to something raw and uncertain. Mara, what do you see when you look at me now? After weeks of watching me struggle through primers like a child. The question caught at something tender in my chest. Do you truly want to know? I would not ask otherwise. I set down the deed carefully, buying myself a moment. The truth felt too large for this small room, but he had asked, and lying was impossible when he could probably sense my heartbeat changing. I see someone courageous, I whispered. Someone who could have refused to learn, could have accepted the story that you were cursed by the goddess and remained comfortable in that narrative. Instead, you question everything. You fight for every word you master. I swallowed. I see someone who deserves to read his own kingdom's truths, not the filtered versions others choose to give him. He moved around the table then, each step deliberate. When he reached me, he stopped close enough that I could smell winter rain on his clothes, cedar and clean cold. Say my name, he said quietly. I had said it before during lessons, when he needed to hear how certain sounds formed. But there was something different in the request now. A vulnerability that made my pulse stumble. Kai, I whispered. He inhaled sharply. Again. Kai. His throat worked, and I found my gaze drawn to the movement, the strong line of his neck. It sounds different when you say it. Not like a title or formality. Like. He searched for words. Like you are speaking to the man, not the prince. Would you prefer I did not? My voice came out too soft. No. The answer was immediate, almost desperate. No, I prefer it more than I should. Something shifted in the space between us, like a door opening onto dangerous territory. I had cared for him before, for his struggle, his pain, his determination. But this was different. This was not just wanting him to succeed. It was wanting to be the one he turned to when he did. Wanting to see his rare smiles directed at me. Wanting. Mara. He said my name like a question and an answer at once. Your heart is racing again. Heat climbed my neck. You keep noticing that. Hard not to when you are this close. His hand lifted, hovering near my face. May I? I nodded, and his fingers settled against my jaw, warm and slightly trembling. The touch sent sensation spiraling through me, too intense to be comfortable, too necessary to refuse. Are you afraid of me? He asked. Yes, I thought. But not the way you mean. I am concerned, I said instead. About what your enemies would say if they saw you this comfortable with a maid. They are already watching, already whispering. His expression darkened. I am aware of their whispers. You do not know all of them, I said, thinking of the conversation behind the door, of bribes and manipulation and conspiracies that ran deeper than either of us had imagined. The urge to tell him everything surged again, about the lords, about the healers, about how his blindness had been purchased and maintained for profit. My tongue pressed against my teeth, words clamoring. I could tell him now. I should. But Kai must have seen something in my face because his gaze sharpened. You are holding something back. I could not lie to him. Would not. But how could I confess conspiracy and betrayal when he was looking at me as if my honesty was the only solid ground in a world of shifting sand? Kai, I began, voice unsteady. If I told you something that would. A sharp knock shattered the moment. We both flinched apart. Enter, Kai called, authority sliding back into his voice like armor. A steward stepped in, bowing low, eyes flicking between us with calculation that made my skin crawl. Forgive the interruption, Your Highness. The council has requested your presence in the Great Hall. For what purpose? The words came clipped, sharp. A formal inquiry, Your Highness. The steward's gaze landed on me, and I saw satisfaction glitter there. Regarding recent changes in your condition and the servant involved. It seems prudent that her influence be examined before the full court. The room tilted. Inquiry. Examined. Pretty words for being dragged before wolves. Kai's jaw hardened. Who called for this inquiry? The lords petitioned as a group, Your Highness. They are concerned for your well-being. I could hear the lie beneath the word concerned now, fear wrapped in false solicitude, hunger disguised as care. What happens if I refuse? Kai asked, voice dangerously quiet. The steward's smile was thin. Refusal would be unwise, sire. It might suggest you have something to hide. His eyes slid to me again, already seeing me on display before the assembled court. Better to address their concerns directly and put all doubts to rest. Kai's hand curled into a fist at his side. For a heartbeat, I thought he would overturn the table, send documents scattering, consequences be damned. Then he inhaled, measured, controlled, the breath of a man swallowing rage. Very well, he said. Tell them I am coming. The steward bowed himself out. The door clicked shut with terrible finality. We were alone again, but the intimacy of moments before was gone, consumed by the looming weight of judgment. Mara. Kai turned to me, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression, an emotion I never expected to see on a prince's face. You will stand with me. My palms were damp, and if they ask questions I cannot safely answer. His jaw set. Then they will learn what happens when they push a prince who has finally learned to read their intentions. It was a promise and a threat, neither of which I could fully trust to protect me. As we walked toward the great hall together, my mind spun. Tell him now. Tell him about the bribes, the conspiracy, the men who orchestrated his blindness. Tell him before they twist your silence into guilt. I opened my mouth as we approached the massive doors. They swung wide before us, and 100 heads turned. The sound of voices falling abruptly silent crashed over me like a wave. Whatever words I had meant to offer drowned on my tongue. They had dressed the hall for judgment, not celebration. No victory banners hung from the rafters tonight. Only the old standards, moon and wolf and crossed swords staring down like witnesses to history's crimes. Torches burned along the walls, their flames reflected in polished stone until the room seemed to hold twice as many eyes as it actually did. The air tasted of smoke and tension and something sharper, the metallic anticipation of blood not yet spilled. Kai's throne sat elevated on the dais, but he did not sit when we entered. He stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the assembled court. The murmur that had filled the hall thinned and broke, falling into a silence more dangerous than any shouted accusation. The steward led me forward until I stood alone on bare stone at the center. No tray to occupy my hands, no task to hide behind. Only my pulse hammering against my ribs and the weight of too many gazes. The circle of lords parted just enough to keep their fine boots clear of whatever might spill from this spectacle. Let it be known, Lord Varen said, stepping forward like a blade from its sheath, that this gathering is called out of concern for the security of the realm and the soundness of our prince's judgment. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, rehearsed outrage, performed fear. I heard the falseness in them now, the careful orchestration. Kai's gaze flicked to Varen, then to me. He gave no signal, no word, but I felt him watching. Not just with his eyes, but with all the skills I had helped him develop, reading posture, tracking hands, sensing the emotional currents in the room. Varen turned, robes whispering against stone. The girl, he said, as if I were not already standing before him. Step forward. I did not move. There was nowhere further to go. State your name, he commanded. Mara, I said, surprised my voice emerged at all. Omega, maid of the palace, and I hesitated, then lifted my chin. Teacher to His Highness. A thin smile cut across Varen's face. Teacher, how bold. You admit you have been alone with the prince during council hours. Yes. My fingers curled at my sides. I do. Gasps fluttered through the hall, false as painted flowers. Kai's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. And did you have permission to instruct our prince? Varen asked. To lay hands on royal documents, to guide royal fingers across sacred texts. His Highness commanded it, I said. Ah. Varen spread his hands, turning to the crowd. There we have it. An Omega, unsworn and unbound, claiming the prince commanded her to, what precisely? Touch him. Whisper in his ear. Spend hours alone with him while the rest of us attend to the realm's business. The word whisper slithered through the hall like oil. A woman near the pillars made a warding gesture. Someone muttered something about unnatural influence. Varen faced the dais again. Your Highness, we all witnessed the change. For 26 years, you have ruled with the dignified acceptance of your condition, a condition the goddess herself decreed. Yet now, at this girl's touch, you claim to see letters? To read words that were beyond you since birth? He tilted his head, false sympathy dripping from every word. How are we to be certain she has not tampered with your mind? Used whatever Omega trick she possesses to cloud your judgment? Speak your accusation plainly, Kai said, voice low and controlled. Very well. Varen's eyes gleamed with anticipation. I accuse this Omega of using unnatural abilities to manipulate your highness, of exploiting your condition for her own advancement, of employing her scent, her proximity, her feminine wiles to bind you to her will. His gaze slid to me, sharp with satisfaction. You summon her daily. You closet yourself with her for hours. You allow her to stand where no servant should stand, at your side, in your private chambers. How else are we to explain your sudden attachment? Heat climbed my neck. A ripple of interest passed through the crowd, scandal wrapped in concern, judgment dressed as care. Kai's eyes found mine across the distance. For a heartbeat, the whole fell away. I saw the question there. Do you want me to end this? To silence them with royal authority? No, I thought, the word loud in my chest. Not yet. My prince, I said, and the title tasted different now, less formality, more plea. May I speak? He hesitated, then inclined his head. You may. All those faces turned toward me like flowers seeking sun, except there was no warmth in them. Only hunger. My knees wanted to buckle. My throat wanted to close. A lifetime of lessons in invisibility screamed for me to bow, to weep, to beg for mercy. I straightened my spine instead. You ask why I touched him? I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I will tell you. Varen snorted. We know why. Ambition, manipulation, a chance to elevate yourself by. I was tired. I cut in, the words rising like a wave too long held back. Of watching a good man suffer while cowards profited from his limitation. The hall went utterly still. I had never called Kai good aloud before. The truth of it made my chest ache. I have served in many houses, I continued. I have seen broken men who turned their pain into cruelty, who used whatever power they had to grind others beneath them. Kai is not such a man. His name, not his title. The intimacy of it rang through the hall like a bell. He was given a throne and a cage at once. I went on, voice gaining strength. This palace, these walls, and blindness wrapped around his mind like iron. And you, I looked at Varen, at the ring of lords beyond him. All of you learned how to use that blindness, how to speak without being read, how to sell his inability as divine curse while it kept you safe from scrutiny. A stir of anger rippled through the crowd. Not because I was wrong, but because I was not supposed to say it where witnesses could hear. You claim I used unnatural abilities, I said. But when I showed him how to trace letters, what happened? Did the moon crack? Did the goddess strike us down? No. His mind did what it has always been capable of doing. It learned. I turned to Kai then, my voice softening without permission. He learned to see through movement what had been hidden in stillness. To follow patterns his eyes could finally track. That is not manipulation. That is revelation of what should have been his from birth. I swallowed, feeling the first crack in my composure. You want to know why I risked touching him without leave? So many eyes. Kai's most of all. Because I knew I might die, I whispered. I have seen what happens to Omegas who forget their place. I knew that one wrong move could see me thrown from these towers and forgotten before my body struck the stones. My voice wavered, then steadied, riding the tremor like a current. And still, when I saw him, this man you call Prince, sitting in a study full of documents he could not read, carrying a burden he had never been allowed to understand, one look was enough. I drew a breath that scraped my lungs raw. He was worth the risk. The last word broke on my tongue. A sound escaped Kai, too contained to be a gasp, too raw to be nothing. I did not dare meet his eyes now. If I did, I might confess everything. I might tell them all that somewhere in the tower room, between traced letters and shared frustrations, I had fallen in love with a prince I had no right to want. Worth, Varen repeated, seizing the word like a weapon. You speak as if you sit in judgment over him. No. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. I speak as someone who understands what it is to be voiceless. To have knowledge but no permission to use it. To see truth and be punished for naming it. The tears escaped then, hot tracks down my cheeks. I did not wipe them away. Let them see. Let them hear. If you must accuse me of something, I said, voice cracking like dry wood catching flame, accuse me of that, of refusing to stand still while a prince was kept half-blind for your convenience, of choosing action over fear. My gaze swept the circle, catching on each face, daring them to look away. I broke the rules of station and propriety and pride. I touched what you believed untouchable. My throat closed on the next words. I forced them through anyway. I did it knowing it could cost me my life, I said. And if that is what this court decides, if you choose to kill me for helping him see, then so be it. My voice cracked cleanly on that syllable, the sound ringing up into the rafters and down into the stones beneath my feet. I would rather be executed for trying to give my prince back what was stolen from him, I whispered, than live another day knowing I saw his suffering and did nothing. Silence fell, real silence, not the hollow performance that had filled the hall before, but a held breath waiting for release. Every eye swung to the dais. To him. I finally looked too. Kai stood at the edge of the platform, knuckles white at his sides. His gaze was fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees want to fold, not in fear this time, but in something far more dangerous. He had heard every word. The question hanging over us now was simple and terrible. What would a prince do in answer? The silence after my words was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. No one moved. No one breathed. Or if they did, I could not hear it over the rush in my own ears. All that existed was the dais, the throne, and the man standing before it, staring down at me as if I had torn open his chest and laid his heart bare on the stone. Kai took one step down from the platform. The sound of his boot on the stair rang like a struck bell. Verdict, my fear whispered. Another step. Leather against stone, a soft scrape I had come to know in tower rooms and quiet corridors. Each footfall brought his scent closer, cedar and winter rain and something uniquely him, clean and sharp beneath it all. My throat tightened. By the fourth step, my vision had begun to blur. I kept my chin lifted anyway. If he chose to cast me out, I would meet it standing. He stopped in front of me, so close the hem of his coat brushed my dress. From this angle, he towered, every inch the Lunar Prince carved into legend. The hall watched, 100 eyes holding 100 silent wishes for my death, my banishment, my humiliation. Kai's gaze moved over my face, taking in the tears, the set of my jaw, the way my hands trembled at my sides. His own hands opened and closed once, as if steadying himself against some unseen current. Then he did something no one in that hall expected. He reached for me. His fingers found my hand, rough and warm, closing around it firmly enough that the tremor running through me had no choice but to still. Gasps rippled outward like stones thrown into water. Look at them, he said quietly, though the sound carried easily to the furthest corners. Listen, Mara. I did. The murmurs were no longer smug, no longer gleeful. They were shocked, disbelieving, edged with dawning fear. Kai turned, still holding my hand, and faced his court. You have heard her, he said. Now you will hear me. His voice rolled through the hall, deeper and more certain than I had ever heard it. This was a man who finally believed his words carried weight. You speak of unnatural abilities, he went on. If there is any manipulation at work here, it was done long before she ever set foot in this palace. His gaze swept the lords, cold as winter. Someone ensured I could not read. Someone made certain that every healer I saw as a child told me the same lie, that the goddess had cursed me, that nothing could be done. A shiver passed through the crowd. No one spoke. I have learned to read more than letters these past weeks, Kai said, voice hardening. I have learned to read faces, to sense deception, to smell guilt. His eyes caught and pinned Varen, who flinched despite himself. Mara did not twist divine decree. She revealed a mermaid chain disguised as fate. He lifted our joined hands just enough that everyone could see. The only power she used was courage. My breath caught. She touched a prince without promise of reward, without protection, knowing it might mean her death, he said, voice softening around the edges. How many of you can claim the same? How many of you have risked anything to give me truth rather than to take advantage of my limitations? No one answered. Torches snapped in the hush. Somewhere a banner creaked against its pole. This inquiry is over, Kai declared. If you want to investigate manipulation, look among those who profited from my blindness, not among those who mended it. He released my hand only long enough to turn back to me. You will not be punished, he said, loud enough for all to hear. You will not be cast out. From this day forward, anyone who moves against you moves against their prince. The words wrapped around me like armor and claim in the same breath. Protection and possession braided together. He squeezed my fingers once more, then led me from the center of the hall, up the steps to the dais. The murmur began again behind us, not triumph this time, but the restless whisper of a story changing shape. I could feel their eyes burning between my shoulder blades as I walked beside him. A dangerous place for someone who had spent her life trying to be invisible. When the doors finally closed behind the last lord and the echoes faded, Kai sagged against the throne as if the stone were the only thing holding him upright. The great hall, emptied of bodies, seemed to breathe with residual tension only we could feel. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. My hand still tingled where his had held it. I should have done more, he said at last, voice rough. They will not stop with public inquiries. You did enough, I replied, surprised to find my voice steady again. You made them afraid of the right thing. And what is that? You. I managed a small smile. A prince who finally reads them. Something flickered in his eyes, pain, pride, something tender that made me want to look away and never look away again. Mara, he murmured. Yes, your highness. He swallowed, the sound somehow loud in the emptied hall. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped down from the dais until we stood on the same level, stone beneath both our feet instead of between us. To my shock, he sank to one knee, then the other. Stop that, I whispered, horrified. You cannot kneel to me. Why not? His gaze never left my face. You are willing to die for me. Should I not at least bend for you? His hands closed gently around my wrists, as if afraid I would flee. The sight of a kneeling prince made my head spin. When you stood there, he said softly, in front of all of them, saying you would rather be executed than remain silent, do you know what I understood? Treason. I tried for humor. It came out thin. Life. He shook his head, almost helpless. For the first time, reading words meant something beyond duty or law. It meant understanding what you risked for me. My throat tightened. I have learned many things since you showed me how to see, he continued. Treaties, contracts, the lies written into documents I signed blindly. But your words, his voice caught. Your words in that hall are the first text that ever made me feel truly alive. The hall seemed to tilt around us. I could command you to stay, he said. I am a prince. I have authority. I could wrap your future in edicts and call it protection. His grip on my wrists loosened, next words coming out rough. But I am so very tired of taking things that are not freely given. He looked up at me, this fearsome legend of a man who had ruled in blindness and chose now, in this moment, to offer all his power to an Omega. So I am asking, Kai said, not as your prince, but as the man you decided was worth saving. Will you stay by my side? Not as a teacher, not as a servant, but as... He exhaled, the word clearly difficult. As mine. I could feel the shape of my answer in every part of me. In the way my pulse leaped at his nearness. In the way my hands ached to touch his face, to smooth the worry from his brow. In the way the thought of walking away now felt like severing my own soul. Fear rose one last time, hissing all its old warnings about courts and leverage and how easily an Omega could be turned into a weapon against the one she loved. But love rose too, quieter and infinitely stronger. I do not know how to be anything but afraid here, I whispered. But I know how to be stubborn, and I know how to read truth in your eyes. I lifted my hands from his grip and set them against his face. His stubble rasped warmly against my palms. He leaned into the touch as if he had been waiting for it all his life. I choose you, I said. The words rang like a vow. I choose the danger and the beauty and whatever storms come with you. I will stay, if you promise to let me keep teaching you. His breath shuddered. Teaching me what? To read, I said. My thumbs brushed the line of his jaw, bold now, claimed by the choice I had made. The caught, the conspirators, the world. And I paused, gathering courage. Your own hat, when it says things your pride does not want to hear. A rough sound left him, half laugh, half broken exhale. His hands rose, circling my waist, drawing me closer until barely any space remained between us. Teach me then, he murmured. Show me. Listen, I whispered back, and I kissed him. Softly at first, carefully, as if he were another new text I was introducing him to. His lips were warm and uncertain initially, then surer as he leaned up into me, hands tightening at my waist. The hall, the cot, the dangers waiting beyond the doors, all of it fell away beneath the thunder of our joined hearts. When we finally parted, his forehead rested against my stomach, his arms banded around me. I threaded my fingers into his hair, feeling the tremor still running through him. We will make them listen too, he said quietly. To you. To us. I looked down at him, the Lunar Prince who had been born into blindness and chose, in the end, to kneel for love, and felt something like hope settle over the stones. Then we begin, I said, with this.